Sai Ram, we're gathered here at the beautiful Feathered Pipe Ranch up in Helena, Montana, and it's an institution I've been part of for 34 years. We're having our second Sai Baba reunion retreat. The first one was back in 1996, and we're very excited to have our old friends, mostly people who have been to Sai Baba since the early 70s, and we're going to share some stories with all of you. My name is Howard Levin. Like I said, I live up here in the season, and the rest of the year I live in San Francisco. So we'll begin today by hearing from Nikki.
Thank you. Yes, my name's Nikki. I wasn't going to say much because I want to listen to you all, but I first saw Sai Baba in the 90s, 1992, and I was in love and just got married, so I was so happy I didn't even want an interview. And then my husband left me a few years ago, and Baba called me back, and he's just held me in his arms and given me miracle after miracle since my husband left and my mother died. It's just been amazing. But I've just come to hear your stories today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gayle, and it's a pleasure to be here with all my friends whom I haven't seen in decades, dare I say? Yes, so it's a pleasure to be here. And my fortune to find Sai Baba is all his grace, because I literally had nothing to do with it. I was carried away because my life had turned to trash and nothing was happening in my life. And this opportunity arose thanks to my sister, her husband, and Robbie, that I found myself driving across half the world to find this obscure, to me, individual who turned my life completely around, changed it completely, allowed me to meet such wonderful, supportive people who've helped me out through the years, and it's just grace to be here.
My name is Michele Kaplowitz. I first heard about Sai Baba in 1969. I immediately started having some dreams. I saw Shirdi Baba, who covered me in vibhuti. When I heard his record album played, tears just came to my eyes. And I thought, well, somebody has to save me. I hope this is the one. And I put all my eggs in one basket and traveled to India. And I was not disappointed. Swami stepped out on the balcony when I walked into the Ganesha gate, which of course there was no Ganesha there then, in March 1st, 1970. And he looked like electric dots in the universe. He just looked like atoms and beauty. And from then on, it was my life. And I'll tell later about more stories. This is Heidi King.
Yes, this is Heidi King, I think. Since it seems we're talking about getting to Swami, I'll continue that. My story might be a little bit different because I first heard about Sai Baba. I was on a long meditation retreat, and a woman from New York City sent out a letter talking about a woman that she had met who had a ring that this master in India had materialized, and that his picture appeared in the ring. And at that point, I'd been doing meditation and doing a lot of reading about yoga and this and that. And I thought to myself, sadhus or spiritual teachers aren't supposed to be, exercising these siddhis or powers and doing this kind of stuff, So I was very dismissive of it. I thought, in a way, I thought I knew better, I guess. But later I went out to California and saw a film that Indra Devi showed of him, and there was something about him. He just was coming out of the gate in Brindavan, and there was just something about how he was walking across that ground that astounded me. I don't know. He hardly seemed human. He seemed to be floating across the ground. And that was the minute I decided I was going to go see for myself. And it was about a year and a half later, actually, before I got there. But my first sight of him at Brindavan was just like in that film. The gate opened and he came out just in that way, seeming to be practically floating across the ground. And I just was totally, I don't even know how you explain that experience. It's just you have this feeling that this is right. This is something that I've been looking for, and here it is, and it's something different than I've ever seen or experienced before.
Hi, I'm Leslie Boucher. I was raised as an atheist, and I really wasn't much of a seeker. But my old boyfriend from college had been to see Sai Baba, had been to see Swami. And he took me down to, since you mentioned Indra Devi, took me down to Indra Devi's ranch in Mexico in 1972. And I walked into her little puja room. And, you know, there were pictures of all aspects of the divine and all teachers and everything all around the room. Everything had this thick vibhuti coming off of it. There was a locket that you'd hold in your hand and your hand would fill with amrit. But something about the energy, I was in there by myself, it was a little tiny room. I had some kind of a major heart-opening experience and just landed on my face on the floor and just had this incredible experience and just cried for an hour. And in that moment, I went from atheist to Sai devotee in about 15 seconds. And that completely changed my life. Within a few months from then, I was in India on the ashram, and that just became my life from then on. And for me, even though I was there, it was, I guess, the end of 72, the beginning of 73. It was very, very quiet for me with Swami. There were not a lot of interviews, things like that. What was established right from the very beginning was the inner connection, the inner relationship with Swami, and that has remained with me my whole life. I mean, I have had interviews. Swami told us to have our sons. We did. He named one of our sons. And then, you know, fast forward a whole bunch of years. He married me and my husband Bruce in an interview room in 2003. So there have been many things, but the most important of it all has been that inner relationship, and Swami has been at the very center core of my life.
Hi, my name is Andrea Schless. So I first heard about Swami in 1970. I was a college student at UCLA, and I'd been there 2 years. And my life at that time, it was, I had everything that I thought I wanted. My life was just going in a very right way, and yet I was unsatisfied. And I had an old boyfriend that had gotten into mystical things of the East, and he sort of started things by we had lunch one day, and he told me all these things about the East and his spiritual experiences, and I wound up going to the Integral Yoga Institute, and I did yoga there, and then after doing that for a few months, they announced that they were having a retreat up north with their guru, Swami Satchidananda, and they chartered a bus. So I had never met a guru, and I wanted to, and I went on the bus, and I wanted to do this retreat. And this bus, it had 2 seats on each side. And I was like in the middle of the bus behind these, a set of 2 seats. And in those 2 seats, one person had this book about Sai Baba. And it had just come out in America. And it was a revised book of Kasturi's. It was an American edition of Satyam Shivam Sundaram. And it was revised by Charles and Faith Penn and Judith Tyberg, I believe. And it was called Sai Baba. And the whole trip up north, this one person who had the book was telling these most amazing stories about Sai Baba to the other person sitting next to her. And I was like the silent partner in this conversation. My ear was right there, and I was hearing all of these amazing stories about Swami, and I was so fascinated. And then she passed the book around the bus, and eventually it came to me, and before I gave it back to her, I wrote all the information about the book. And when I got back from the retreat, the first thing I did was head to the Bodhi Tree bookstore, which was the spiritual bookstore in Los Angeles at that time. It had all the spiritual books. And I searched up and down that bookstore, every single bookshelf, and finally I found one copy of that book right near the cash register. It was the last place I looked. And needless to say, I bought it. So I took the book home and I started reading. And from the very first page, with all my heart, I knew that everything that was being said about Sai Baba was the truth. And it was just truth, and I just felt like he was my master. Then I got partway through the book, and Kasturi says, "You can't just come to Puttaparthi to see Sai Baba. It has to be his will for you to come to India to be with him." So then I stopped reading, and I paused, and I just thought in my mind, I wonder if Sai Baba would let me come to India to be with him. And at this point, I just have to tell you that I came from a Jewish background, and very normal person. I had never had a spiritual experience in my life. But when I asked that question, in my mind, I heard a voice saying to me, "Come, come." And at the same time I heard the voice, I felt all this wave of bliss, and I'd never felt bliss, spiritual bliss in my life. I felt it welling up through my feet and all the way through my body, flowing, this amazing bliss. And from that point on, I spent the next, I didn't stop until I got to Swami's. It took me 2 years. I had to graduate from college first, but I got there.
Saram. My name is Bruce Boucher from Ojai, California. My experience with Baba was, I'm one of the late bloomers in the group, in that I didn't get to Puttaparthi till 1979. And I decided that I would do a spiritual pilgrimage around India. So I cut a map out of the National Geographic magazine, and that was my trip ticket. I had no idea where I was going, because the longest flight I'd taken before was 500 miles, not halfway around the world. And I bought some mosquito netting, and I sewed myself a little tent to keep the mosquitoes off. And shortly before I left, I was living in Tucson, Arizona, and I went to Jonathan Roof's house. That's where the center was at that time, Jonathan Rose Roof. And there was one of Richard Bach's movies up on the screen, and it was Swami walking across the sand giving darshan. I was sitting on the floor, and when he came into view, physically I was knocked on my back. It flipped me back over. And a short time later, I bought a one-way ticket and I jumped on an airplane and took off. And when I landed in India, I migrated from Calcutta down to Chennai, and I was having breakfast in a little hotel. And this Indian man sat across the table from me, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm on a spiritual pilgrimage, and I'm going to travel around India." And he said, "You should leave immediately and go see Sathya Sai Baba in Puttaparthi." So that night, I got on a bus, and I took the all-night bus ride from Chennai to Puttaparthi, and I stayed for 6 months. And the desire to travel around India left, and I stayed there. And like Leslie, my path has always been an inner path, and Swami over the years has made that abundantly clear. And perhaps I can share some stories later on. But the thing that cemented that path in the very, very beginning was that I was given a room in Puttaparthi by myself in Baba's ashram for 3 months, the first 3 months. And I stayed there, and I went to darshan, and then I went back to my room. I went to darshan, I went back to my room. And that was how I became grounded in the spiritual path, not needing to follow the roads around India.
Hi, my name is Marc, and I came to Sai Baba in 1968. I started studying with Hilda Charlton, who ran a meditation group in New York City. Hilda had been a dancer who had spent 18 years in India as both a dancer and a spiritual seeker. And when she came back to America, she started a group to teach spirituality to young people. And somehow I wound up in that group. And after some time, Hilda turned to me and she said, "It's time. You need to go be with Sai Baba." So I bought a one-way ticket to India. And I ended up at Sai Baba's school in Whitefield near Bangalore. And my first experience with Sai Baba was quite remarkable. I was sitting on the darshan line, and Swami came out, and my body went totally rigid. And I had no ability to move any muscle in my body. I was totally paralyzed. And thinking back over the years of what that meant, I felt like Swami was telling me that I control every muscle of your body. I have control of the whole universe. It was quite remarkable. I had many experiences after that, full of bliss and also trials and tribulations. But it was a remarkable experience for me for many years. And I remain a staunch Sai Baba devotee to this day.
Sai Ram, I'm Howard Levin, as I said, and I was an international backpacking hippie and was traveling, hitchhiking through Europe, ended up in Istanbul, and I met India Supra on the Greek-Turkish border. And India is the owner and founder of Feather Pipe Ranch. So she said, "Well, we're all going to India, why don't you come?" And I decided I would go to India, and we got separated, and just through fate, I ran into India again in Goa in about 10 months later. And she said she was going to go on a spiritual pilgrimage to find her teacher. And so I said, "Well, I'll go with you." And her friend Lynn was with her, and so the three of us started walking on this pilgrimage, and we got into eventually an Indian truck. They called them lorries, and there was a big picture of Sai Baba, hanging above the dashboard, and the driver was telling us about Baba. But through a series of events, I got hepatitis and had to go to the hospital in Mumbai, and then ended up going up north because I was interested in Buddhism. And when I was up in Almora, this Ayurvedic doctor gave me a Bhagavad Gita, which I had never read. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the passage where it says that Krishna says, I incarnate in every age to age, that really jumped out at me. And I just couldn't get that out of my head. And I kept thinking, well, if there's any age that we need an avatar, it's this age with nuclear weapons. And, this was kind of 1969 and height of the Vietnam War. And I felt like, so I prayed to God that if you've incarnated on the earth, I'd like to find you. And eventually, I ended up at Baba's. I found, just from a mutual friend of ours I met at a bus station, told me that India and their sister Vijay were at Sai Baba's. So just by chance, and I wrote to them, and they wrote back and said, you have to come. And when I got there, it was June 5th, 1970. And the minute I walked in the gate, I just felt this energy. It was just, I felt like I had come home. It just kind of enveloped me like a warm feeling. And I was just arrived, and within minutes, everybody said, Swami's leaving, and he came out the gate. There was a little Fiat that he had, a little white Fiat with orange curtains, and he drove off. And I sat there for 10 days with the other Westerners that were there, some of them sitting in this room now, and read everything I could. And then when Swami came back, we were all standing. It was a little college in Whitefield. The big college hadn't been built yet. And we were standing on the veranda, and he walked past me, and he goes, new man, And he called us in for an interview. And sitting in that interview, I was kind of in the back, and everybody was in front of me. Swami just looked totally divine. He had an aura of light around him. He was so beautiful. And he was talking about how when the devotee longs for God, God also longs for the devotee like a stalactite and stalagmite in a cave. And he said like this, and he waved his hand and produced a round black stone, and he passed it around to everybody, and it was just completely round. And then he took it back and blew on it with his breath, and he blew a little cave in the stone with a stalactite and a stalagmite. And he said, see like this, and passed it around again. And I just knew that he wasn't from this world, that he was divine, and that I had found, everything that I was looking for. And Swami's been there for me and in my life, and the biggest part of my life, I would say, since then. So 49 years.
Sairam, my name is Phil Goslin. I'm from Amherst, Mass. I think what sort of stands out for me here is that we knew each other when we were very young. And it's almost 50 years later. And we knew each other when we were part of that mystery of Sathya Sai. And we're still part of that mystery of Sathya Sai. Everyone's sort of scratching their heads, what was that all about with Sathya Sai? And what is the meaning of my life with Sathya Sai? And it's just sort of our stories are ricocheting amongst ourselves. And the mystery is still there, and the sort of the feeling of being bonded with Sathya Sai is still there. And even though sometimes, we may feel distant or cynical or whatever, but really it flares up even with just a little nudge, that ember sort of boom, it lights up again. So it's very lovely, I think. And I've told my story about how I came to see Swami quite a bit, but just the quick version is when I was a senior in college, I was interested in finding a guru in India, and I was also very sort of addicted to media stuff. And so Swami appeared in the Newsweek magazine of November 1969, the religion section had a lovely article about Sathya Sai. And the following week, I was at a conference and his name was mentioned. And the following week, there was in the Village Voice the tiniest little ad. It said, for more information about Sathya Sai, write to Dick Bach. And then the following week was Christmas, and my father, this is 1969, my father knew I had an interest in the East. And this little record store he gave me, Sathya Sai Baba Chants the Bhajans. So I felt very sort of swept in. And a year later when I got there, my reaction, we knew so little about him that I thought, well, he's sort of Krishna-like, very light and jangly or smiley or whatever. And I was sitting at Whitefield Darshan, the first Darshan, and he came around the corner. And it was like very deep and dark, and it was like intense. And I was just so surprised that actually, instead of going rigid or whatever, my jaw just, it was like this. It literally just hung open. And as he walked by, he sort of looked down in my mouth and sort of gave a little chuckle and then went on. So that's my how I first met Swami.
My name is Richard Bayer. I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Northern California. And my experience of coming to Swami is probably some combination of everything that you've heard, bits and pieces of how things came together and how we heard of Swami and how we wound up there, which I did in 1971. But I'd like to fast forward a little bit to 1974 when I had been living in Prashanthi Nilayam and working in Prashanthi Nilayam for about a year. And there was an experience that pretty much informed the next 45 years of my life. Swami had called a group of us in for an interview, and one of them was a college student. Now, sometimes people don't realize, because of the divinity of Sai Baba and the aspect of what went on around him and the mystery, that being around him could be extremely down to earth. He was often joking, teasing, and wanting to lighten the mood. And he was speaking to this college student and saying, "You're very lucky. The college students come here and you haven't had much experience of life yet. You don't have the responsibility of a wife, of a business, of a family, of other obligations. So you can take this pure teaching and use it to move ahead with your life." And Swami turned to me and said, "You have a question?" I rarely ask questions. And I said, "Well, what would be the right practice for someone who does have a wife and a family and a business and some obligations," which I had at the time. And he laughed, and then he got a very serious look on his face and said, "Adjustment sadhana." And the group of people that was in the interview all looked pretty puzzled. And he said, "Let me tell you a story." And a version of the story was printed in a book by someone who was there, but it didn't have all of it. Swami said, Jesus was walking down a dirt road with his disciples. And just ahead, down the road, there was a dead dog lying there. And it was surrounded by flies, and it was an awful sight. And his devotees were nudging him to go to the other side of the street and walk around this very sad sight. And Jesus pushed them aside and walked up to this dead dog and knelt down and said, "Do you see the beauty in this animal? Look at his teeth. In his life, he had to struggle for food. And he had such wonderful teeth. Even in death, you can see them. And those teeth enabled him to survive. And his coat is falling off. But that coat protected him from the heat. It protected him from the weather. And like this, Jesus pointed out these aspects that were so horrifying to his disciples that they wanted to get away from it as quickly as possible. And Swami said, your sadhana is whatever is in front of you. whatever you see, whatever comes in front of you, adjust. Do the best you can with it. There's nothing else that you need to know. There's nothing else that you need to do. And that was an example to me of how Swami could pull together all of the elements of the history of humans seeking, looking for mystical answers, mystical solutions to their many lifetime problems, and just in a nutshell, give you a kernel that you could wake up every day and what's in front of me, and I'll do my best with it. And sometimes I'll succeed and sometimes I'll fail, but it doesn't matter. And that was the moment that's informed the last 45 years of my life, and I'm happy to share it.
Hi, I'm Dave Walker, and how I got to know Baba, or came to know of him, I should say, it was in 1970, and I had spent some time in therapy, and I was at a point where I was just kind of bouncing around, kind of looking for something. I didn't know what, really. And I saw a poster advertising, Dick Bach was showing a film of Baba, and it was in a small bookstore. I think it was called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore. It was in Hollywood somewhere on Melrose, I think. So I decided to go. I went down there, I saw the film, and at one point during the film, there was a close-up of Baba. I think he was standing on a veranda. I don't even remember where it was taken, whether it was in Puttaparthi or Whitefield. And he took a close-up of him, and it was just his head, and he had a very strong stare, I guess, or gaze. And it caught me. And for a moment, I wasn't looking into his eyes. I felt like I was just looking into the universe. I could see all the stars. And it pretty well blew me away. After the film, Richard Bach said there was a chartered flight being put together up in San Francisco, and anybody wanted to go could sign up with him after. And at that point, I decided that's it. I'm going to be on that plane. And I signed up for it, and paid for it. It took a while for it to get together. Went up to San Francisco and hung around for a week, waiting for the flight to get together. Found out it had been canceled, and there were no refunds. So I went back home and got a commercial flight, went to India, and that was it. So I spent a year there, and one of the best years of my life. So that was it.
Yes, my name is Benna. I come from Germany, from Nuremberg, and how I came to Sai Baba was, I was the second time in India. I came overland, and the second time I was in North India, then I went to Goa. And I was already a year in India when I was in Bangalore, very tired, mentally tired and very confused. And then I thought maybe I go to Puri. And then I changed my mind and tried to hitchhike to Hyderabad. And yeah, before when I was in a bazaar, I was staying in a Sikh temple for 3 days, and you got food and you could stay there. I didn't have any money at that time. And then I tried to hitchhike to Hyderabad, and I got stuck near Mudanahalli on Nandi Hill. And then I thought, why do I not come forward? I came from Bombay to Bangalore in one night. And so all of a sudden, an American couple stopped with their VW bus. And they were saying, yeah, we're going to Puttaparthi, there is a Shivaratri festival. And I thought, okay, I will go to the Shivaratri festival and see what's happening there. I had been before, in this year in India, I had seen different gurus, and I was a bit tired going to ashrams. And so I thought maybe it's a festival and go there. I didn't know about Sai Baba before, and I saw they opened the door of the VW bus, and there was this huge picture of Swami. And I thought, strange, he looks like Jimi Hendrix. And it was, I didn't got attached to this outer form. So I thought, let's go to Buddha Party. And then it was a week before Shivaratri, and there was no buildings you could stay. So I was used to, took my straw mat, went to the Chitravati River, stayed there the night, and came in daytime. I came for darshan. And that time I came for darshan, I looked very wild. I had a dhoti, just in a sadhu bag on my side, and no shirt. And I was sitting in darshan line, I didn't know really what was going on. Went back to the Chitravati at night, and my mind was going, rotating. It was, I was on the edge of, getting crazy. And then Shivaratri came, and then all of a sudden I met some friends who came from Goa, like India and some other people, and we got this interview. And when in that interview, my mind was still in turmoil, and all of a sudden it became very, very smooth. It was like the sea was very quiet, and Swami took me behind the curtain for 2 minutes, and he told me, "You're always thinking good, bad, good, bad, good, bad." And then also he told me about the stomach, I should eat better. And then I thought, after the interview, I thought there's no traveling anymore, no outside traveling, I'm home. But I still could not get to Swami's outer form. That still took me some months I was very much into Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. And then after Shivaratri, I thought, what should I do now? And India and some of the other people said, we're going to go to Whitefield, get some private interview. So we went to Whitefield, and there was, of course, no accommodation. We were living under a tree, just opposite the ashram. There were about 7 people of us, and some are here in the room. And and then we went every day to the darshan line, and it was difficult food situation, so there was a little restaurant we could only eat, and we called it Horror Bhavan, which means like the house of horror, And so, and then after these 2 months, all of a sudden Swami called us in. I was writing a letter. Swami, there is a pump house. I want to stay there during the rainy season. And then I just had this letter, went to darshan, and all of a sudden some of Swami's responsible person there, they came and said, all the Westerners have to move in. And so the thing started. Like our group of young Westerners, we were like the kindergarten. We were the first class, and slowly we got more and more teach through Swami, and Swami became my life. And after 4 months, I was ready to accept Swami's outer form. I had a dream, Ramakrishna and Swami just melted. And then Swami came out for darshan, and I had a feeling, now I'm ready. And he came, was standing before me, and then I touched his feet, and that was the beginning of 2 years being with him, and of course being with him the 49 years now. Sai-ram.
My name is Brian Steele, and unlike a lot of the stories I'm hearing here initially in my very early 20s and the very early 1970s, I was not a spiritual seeker. And I was actually a recovering Catholic. And then what happened was my brother gave me a book by Arnold Schulman about Sai Baba, and this was 1971 or 2. And I read it and went, well, that's intriguing, but I've always been a skeptic in my life. And then in 1974, my brother said Michael said he was going to Buddha Party. Did I want to come? And I didn't have anything going on at the time, and I thought, well, okay, what I'll do is I'll go ahead to Puda Party, and then I'm going to I'll spend 2 weeks there, and then I'll head on north to Kashmir, rent a houseboat, and do the hippie thing. So we end up going to Puda Party and at Prashanthi Nilayam, and my very first day there, during darshan, I was on front row, and I'm watching Sai Baba walk, doing his darshan, and he stops down the line, and he makes vibhuti for somebody. And being a skeptic, I was wondering, I wonder if he has a tube up his arm or something. And he kept walking down the line, and he got to the guy right next to me and told the guy next to me to put his hands together, which the gentleman did. And then instead of looking at the man while he's creating vibhuti, he was looking at me and he rolled up his sleeve. And I'm looking there, and he's looking at me, and then when he's done, he kind of dusted me off with the vibhuti a little bit. And I went, okay, end of that theory. And then I never made it north. I ended up spending 4 months with my brother there. And it was phenomenal, just interviews, festivals, watching his miracles, everything. Yeah, I got blown away. So then 2 years later, we went back for another 4 months. And I've been back since, and he has let me know that he's with me all the time. And he said that even in an interview, don't worry, I'm always with you, I know what's going on. And in the 1990s, there was this problem at work to show how it just keeps carrying over. Anyway, there were situations happening at work, and I said, I could really use your help on this. I said that during the interview, and he said, I've got it under control. It's going to be okay. And it was. And I have to say that throughout my life, I've been blessed beyond measure.
Sairam, I'm Mike Steele, and I went and visited a friend in the foothills of the Sierras. Kriyananda, who was a follower of Yogananda, had a cooperative community up there. And I was visiting a friend, and she worked in the print shop, and up on the print shop, there was this picture of some guy with a big afro. It was just a bust, it didn't show that he was wearing a robe, but he had an orange shirt on with no collar. And, so I said, who's that, And I thought it looked like Jimi Hendrix too, or Buddy Miles. And I really liked them, And so I'm still a big Jimi Hendrix fan. Anyway, she said, well, that's Sai Baba. And I was so caught by his image. I mean, there was something about his looks that just captured me. And I said, well, what is he? What's he do? Why has he got a picture up there? And she just happened to have the record by Richard Bach. And so she gave it to me. It was an LP, and I played it. And I had read the Bhagavad Gita, and on that record, not only, I was raised a Catholic, like my brother, and so I was used to people singing in a foreign language, and I wasn't put off by the bhajans. I thought his voice was beautiful, and the spirit of the people that were responding, it just overwhelmed me. And then on the flip side was the discourse in which he announces who he is, and he mentions, I incarnate from age to age. And I realized, oh my God, this guy's claiming to be Krishna. I mean, that's the same thing Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. And then I said, do you have anything else? And she happened to have the book of Kasturi's, the first in his biography. So I read that, and it just had me in tears. I just decided, I thought there's no way that if this guy was bogus, that he could fool so many people for so long, you know. On the other hand, if there's anything to it, it would make a big difference in my life. I mean, it would change my whole worldview, you know. And so I decided I really wanted to go see for myself. And that was in 70. And it took 4 years before I was able to go. And in the meantime, I had moved up to Alaska, so I, you know, didn't know anybody who had ever had any contact with him, and didn't even know anybody in America had, except that the book, I did have Charles and Faith Penn's address because it was in the book. So I did actually write to Charles, and he wrote back. He was very nice. But I had no idea how to get there or anything like that, or what we were getting into. So we got these excursion fare tickets for 4 months, and they were the cheapest ones available then. So we flew to Delhi, and then we took Air India to Hyderabad, and then we took the bus from Hyderabad. And we were told, oh yes, you'll get there today, you know. And in fact, we wound up spending the night in Anantapur, and then we finally got to Puttaparthi. It was a miracle that we got there because, you know, they don't have English on the bus, and nobody could even understand our pronunciation of Puttaparthi. So we finally got there, and it was like the beginning. I mean, Dasara was just starting, and I mean, thousands of people in this place. And at the time, you know, there was East Prashanthi, and there was a shed, and so we found a place to unroll our bags. But before we did that, I found out when the bus was leaving, because I thought, oh my God, Swami's not even going to know that we're here. This is not at all what I had in mind. I'm not sure I want to even stay, you know. I'll go up to Kashmir with my brother. And so we get from the guy, there was a Sevadal in the shed who said, okay, leave your stuff here, but there's somebody going to the cafeteria. It was lunchtime, and he said he'll show you where the cafeteria is. So the guy who was going there took us to the cafeteria, and in the course of it, you walk in front of the mandir, and while we were walking in front of the mandir, the guy says, well, you know, this is the mandir, Swami has a room up here on the right side, and there's the balcony, and then he sometimes comes out of the room and eats over in the room on the left of the balcony. And just as he was saying that, I mean, we were standing like from here to that poor elk head there. And Swami comes out on the balcony, and just, you know, I had been thinking, like I said, he won't even know we're here. Well, there he was standing there, and we were the only people around. It was like lunchtime, and people were sacked out under any tree they could find. It was really hot. And Swami just stood there and looked at us. Like, it seemed like forever, but it was probably about 10 seconds. And you described the gaze somebody was talking about, and I'm sure you've all experienced that piercing gaze. And I was just looking up at him, and I can't describe the feeling, but then he just raised his hand like that and goes like that, and then he walked on. And I've been with him ever since.